My name is Alexander Kuechel. I was born in Berlin, Germany. I'm a survivor of 7 concentration camps. My parents were manufacturer of men's clothing, middle class, and we were German citizens. My parents originally came from Poland. However, in my house, I never heard a Polish word spoken. We only spoke German. I remember when I was 9 years old when we had Hitler came to power, and we had Kristallnacht when they destroyed all the synagogues in Germany, and people were taken into a concentration camp. I went to a Christian school, and at that time I didn't encounter any anti-Semitism, almost none. And when Hitler came to power, of course, we had to leave the Christian schools, and I had to go to a private Jewish school, which became later a private school. And most of our teachers were college educated, and we had quite a wonderful education. And I had a sister, and in 1938, I belonged to a Jewish Boy Scout group, a Zionist group, and I was supposed to go to Palestine. Prior to this, before the Kristallnacht came, my father was picked up by the German police, and he was sent to Poland, because originally he came from Poland. And the Polish people didn't let the Jewish people in. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, and after they were sitting in no man's land for a couple of months, and then after a while they were let into Poland. So I was remaining with my mother in Berlin, and she was concerned about my sister. My sister became engaged to a Jewish man, and they went tried to go illegally to Switzerland. Switzerland didn't let the Jewish people in, and one has to remember that Switzerland gave a directive to all the to Germany to put in each passport the letter J, which means for Jude, for being Jewish. So from there, my sister, which I found out later on with her future fiancé, went illegally to Belgium. And they were in Brussels and in Antwerp. And after the war, I found out she had a young boy, which was maybe 2 years old. And in 1942, they were picked up, they were sent to Auschwitz. And in January 1939, I was ready to go to Palestine. I had a certificate to go to Palestine. And our leader from our Jewish organizations came to my mother and asked her that I should forfeit my certificate, which means a visa to go into Palestine, for the people who were already in a concentration camp. At that time, if you had any kind of visa in Germany, you were able to immigrate you were able to get out of the concentration camp. And with the promise that I would be able to go perhaps to Palestine, or maybe to England with the children transport. So in 1939 in June, the Gestapo came and we got papers. We had to leave Germany. We had one suitcase, which was taken later away from us when we crossed the border, with 10 marks in our pocket. And we went to the border through Neubenchen, it was called, and we went to Poland. On the way to Poland, we picked up my father, who was in a little town, and we went to the city of Krakow. And 2 weeks before the war started, I received a letter from Warsaw, the city from Poland. They told me, my dear Alexander, we can tell you the good news that your permit to go to England with the children transport just arrived. And your passport is you'll receive the passport in a couple of weeks. September 1st, the Germans marched into Poland. I was unable to get out of Poland, got stuck. And the Germans marched in, of course. They were very brutal. In Poland, a lot of Jewish people had beards and sidelocks, pears. They cut their beards. They had to clean the sidewalk with a toothbrush, and the horror began in Poland. From there, my parents and we went to a small little town was called Krzanów, which later was annexed to Germany, was called Krenau, and we stayed in that little tiny town there. And my father worked for the Germans to make uniforms, with the idea nothing is going to happen to us, because the Germans were always so smart to pretend, oh, if you work for us, nothing's going to happen. In a few years later, in 1942, I believe, I went to work camp, and I came home once a week. And then I was picked up and went to different concentration camps. The question always comes up, how come you were in so many concentration camps? Well, the Germans always, 3 o'clock in the morning, you were called for roll call. In wintertime, you were standing there, cold. And I remember the first time I came to a concentration camp, which was called Blechhammer.
How do you spell that?
Blechhammer was spelled Blechhammer. There were the Hermann Göring's worker there, and it was a very large place. They had English prisoners, they had German prisoners, they had Italian prisoners, they had even prisoners from Palestine, Jewish prisoners who belonged to Jewish brigades. And I went to that camp, and I remember the first time, 3 o'clock in the morning in wintertime, they start counting us, and it took hours to count us, cold. And I saw those people, they looked like skeletons, thin, long noses, which I wrote in my poem that I wrote. And they counted us before we went to different details, different commandos, but we worked in different things. I worked in Blechhammer. We unloaded bricks. We unloaded bricks, and our hands were all bloody. We had no gloves. We unloaded cement, and we had to go over a little bridge there from the sea there, and in the Germans didn't like us. They pushed us over and fell in the water. And from there, I went to different concentration camps. And the questions comes up many times, how come you survived? And I always say it was luck, luck, and luck. Of course, there was a determination that I wanted to live. And since I belonged to the Boy Scouts, it helped me a lot, because I was strong. But again, I must say, it was not my intelligence. To a certain extent, yes. I never looked a German in the eye, because I never wanted him to remember me. And and I was able many times to organize some extra food, whether it was in the kitchen when I knew somebody got an extra meal, and so I was able to survive. Now, people don't realize when you came into a concentration camp, you lost your identity. They cut your hair, they took every belongings away from you. You ceased to exist as a human being. You got a number. I did not get a number on my arm. I got a number around my neck, because the only number people got were in the concentration camps where they had extermination camps. But one has to realize you didn't exist any longer. You didn't have any knowledge what's happening in the outside world. In the beginning, you were able to get some mail, not afterwards. You were nobody. You had no name any longer. And you worked very hard, and you got very little food. You got one piece of bread. And on Sunday, when you didn't work, you were exposed to the shenanigans from the Germans. They chased you to the concentration camp. You had to clean the camp, your place where you stayed. You were in 3 bunks, sleeping on straw, and you worked very hard. And I have seen people in the concentration camp, they gave up completely. And we had some people from Holland, and they said, I cannot work any longer. I cannot walk. I don't care. It's mir ganz egal, they said. I don't care. I don't want to live. So I've seen people dying from hunger, people giving up on life, people were hung, people were shot, people tried to escape, which was impossible because we were in hostile territory in Germany, and you had no papers, and of course the people living there, that didn't help you if you were to escape. And I was in one concentration camp I remember very much. It was called Graditz.
Could you spell that, please?
Graditz was spelled G-R-A, which is an R-E, which is A umlaut, D-I-T-Z. There was a concentration camp. Typhoid broke out. 90% of our people died out. Now the Germans closed the camp. We were not taken on transportation cars because the Germans were afraid they might contaminate the German population. So the camp was closed and we were by ourselves. Typhoid came from not being clean and getting lice. And people became delirious, and we had no doctors, we had no medication or medicine, so people just died. And after we got the lice, we got fleas, which ate us up completely, and we were all by ourselves. And I became well after a while, and as a matter of fact, when I was sick, I remember I had a young man next to me. His name was Werner Baumgarten. He used to be in France. He originally came from Germany. And he said to me, Alex, I can't make it any longer. And I remember like today, behind me there was a window broken and the snow came in there. And he survived. And then after a while, then when people got well, all of a sudden they used to call us to go downstairs to be shipped to another concentration camp. I was so very weak that I figured out I'm not going to go down there because I wouldn't survive. Thinking that the Germans would not know how many people are still alive and they wouldn't come up to our camp. They were afraid to be contaminated. So after a while, when the camp was completely liquidated, then I went down and we were sent to another concentration camp. No, I've seen many terrible things at the concentration camp, and it was very, very bad. At that time, I didn't know anything about a gas chamber. We had no idea about a gas chamber. We only heard after the war I knew about a gas chamber. Because people who were in a gas chamber never returned, so they never came to our concentration camp. We had some people come to Graditz, I remember like today, and they said to the camp leader, oh, I'm very strong, I want to work. And they were supposed to be killed. And then one morning, we heard they were put in the shower, cold shower and hot shower, and then they were shot. In the morning, we came in, few people from our prisoners, and we saw the brain on the walls. They were shot in the head. And we had to take those corpses and they were buried outside the little city. And one day in the same camp, 3 people tried to escape and they were brought back from the commandant on his Mercedes. One was put on top of the Mercedes, one in back where the spare tire was, and one on top of the car. They were half dead already, and the camp leader called the kapos, which are overseers. They are prisoners also, some of them very brutal, and they said to them, finish him off. In the morning, I remember like today, 3 o'clock in the morning, we were called out in roll call again, standing and counted again, and we saw the people were hung on top of it. And I remember like today, like one had a Star of David around his neck and a cross around his neck. And we were giving extra soup in that particular morning. And those people were buried then afterwards. From there I went to another concentration camp, of course. The last concentration camp I was in Langenbielau-Reichenbach, was called the Sportschule. Langenbielau was spelled Langenbielau. We were in that particular concentration camp, and of course in the concentration camp we had a person who ran the concentration camp who was a prisoner himself. He was a liaison between the SS outside and the camp inside. Now we had guards which were men and women, SS. And as time went by, when the time was already in, I remember in March 31st, 1945, was my birthday. I was in a concentration camp, and the one I just mentioned to you. And I remember the commandant came out, and we had to crawl from one barrack to the other one. And he said, if you're crawling over in a certain amount of time, you can rest for 5 minutes. And this went on quite a bit. And I remember the day because it was my birthday. At that time, a few weeks later, we heard already the cannons in North Germany. They came from Hamburg. And the SS was very much afraid of the Russians. They knew the Russians came in. And they were contemplating of taking us deeper into Germany, liquidating the camp and taking us deeper into Germany. As I found out after the war, many camps, many people were taken deep into Germany in wintertime. They couldn't walk. They were shot if they couldn't walk. And the simple solution for the Germans were really all they had to do, taking their uniforms, throwing them away, and go home to their homeland. The war almost was finished, yet the war against the Jewish people was never finished because they took the prisoners deeper into Germany, and whoever, like I mentioned before, whoever couldn't walk got killed. So our camp leader, the prisoner, the liaison between him and the SS, convinced the SS to leave us alone and just disappear in the morning. And as I mentioned before, the SS was very much afraid of the Russians because they knew how much damage they did to the Russians. They would take revenge on the Russians. So in May, all of a sudden we woke up in the morning, nobody was there. It was eerie. It was like nobody was in the camp at all. The guards disappeared. There was no guards. Women and SS disappeared. And the Russians came in. The Russians looked at us, stood on our tanks, and of course, Russia was very anti-Semitic. They didn't like the Jewish people. And all they really cared about to go to Berlin and fight in Berlin the last few days. They left a few Russians behind, and they couldn't give us any food, no medical attention in comparison to all the other concentration camps which we found out later on after the war, which were given medication and help, and people were sent to the hospitals. And when I think about it today, I can visualize that the Russians had a very rough time because the Germans were brutal against the Russians. They killed millions of them. And they had the desire only go back and taking revenge against the Germans. And of course, they themselves didn't have too much food either. And they had no availability of giving us any help as far as medicine or food is concerned. So we went to the German farms and tried to get some food, and the Germans, of course, didn't give us anything at all, nothing at all. So the few people who were left after the war, the Russians there, which stayed there, and one happened to be a Jewish guy, and he said to us when he spoke in Jewish, he said, don't be careful that they don't hear me because they're very anti-Semitic. They should know that I'm Jewish. And so we took him, he took his machine gun, we went to the farms, and finally when they saw the machine gun, they opened up their cellars downstairs, and they had all food hanging down there, and sausages and all kind of stuff, and finally were able to organize some food. And we went to some of the empty houses because some of the Germans escaped. They were afraid of the Russians. And we got some clothing, and we went in some town which was called Waldenburg, which was spelled Waldenburg. And we stayed there. Now here one has to visualize, we came out of a concentration camp. We had no place to go to. There was no place, every place. People who were in different concentration camps, not Jewish people, they were able to go to their homeland, whether it was France, Belgium, or Holland, or Germany. We had no place to put our head on somebody's shoulder and cry. Even though there were no tears, we had no tears any longer. And many of our youngsters, our group, they got married, and we tried to escape. We tried to go to different countries. It was very, very difficult to immigrate to any other country. One has to remember, I remember then I said to myself, well, I'm still in hostile territory. I was in Germany. I was in a country that killed us. And here are all the other countries who before the war were not able to take us in. Going back to, since I bring that subject up, in Germany, to escape, people went to different countries like America. Maybe in the early 30s, were able to go to America. But in 1938, it was very, very difficult to come to America. We had a very anti-Semitic State Department in America. We had one who was in charge, was called Breckinridge Long. He gave a directive to all the European countries to make it very difficult for every Jewish person, any Jewish person, to come to the United States of America. 90% of all the visas were left open. That means only 10% of the Jewish people were able to come to America. And then we see all these South American countries like Brazil and Argentina and different places didn't let Jewish people in. Australia, Canada didn't let any Jewish people in. And after the war, I read a book which says, none are too many. None are too many. That was a book written by Australia. During the war, of course, they let some people in from Germany, children who were bumped out, they let in to America, to Canada. And I read just an article recently, Mexico didn't let any people in there, and there were 20,000 Jewish children were supposed to be brought out under the auspices of Sweden, and America refused to let them in. They're supposed to let in people in to Alaska, and the State Department said no. So these countries are as guilty. They're participating in the execution of the Jewish people in Europe. There's consequences when somebody does something, whether it's a human being or a country. When a country does something, it can be for the good or for the bad. So the consequences come in later on. We see all the consequences we have today, what's happening in this world. Going back to liberation, since my sister I thought was in Belgium, and I hitchhiked to Prague, and I went to the Belgian consulate there. Today I don't even remember how I did it, to hitchhike to Prague. And the Belgian consul told me you have to wait for the Belgian citizen to be taken back to their homeland first, and you have to wait 2 weeks. So I decided not to wait in Prague for 2 weeks. Instead, I hitchhiked on a Russian truck, and I went to Berlin. And in Berlin, I was able somehow, I don't know, remember how I did it. I found out that I had a friend of mine who used to belong to the same Boy Scouts and Zionist organization. He was alive, and I came to his house, and I opened the door, and his mother was fainted almost. She didn't think I was alive. And she said to me, Alex, you don't speak German anymore. You speak almost like you speak Jewish. realizing that I never spoke Jewish in my life before, being in a concentration camp, mostly Polish Jewish people who spoke Yiddish, I had to learn the Yiddish language. So when I came after the war, my German was not as perfect any longer. I spoke Yiddish a little bit. So here I was I saw a young girl there, which was 13 years old at that time. Her name was Lilo. And her name was Lilo, and she was adopted by my friend, and she was living underground with my friend. But that's a different story again. And this particular girl, Lilo, 10 years later, I married through certain circumstances. And from there, from Berlin, I went back to Poland again, and I took some people out on Russian trucks. They wanted to leave Poland, and Poland already closed the border. And I told them they should say when we came to the border, they're from Holland. And I took them over to Berlin, and 2 girls and 3 girls. And we wound up in the city of Fürth, which is spelled F-U-E-R-T-H, which is right close to Nuremberg. We had the Nuremberg trials. And we had, most of the people after the war, they were put in a displacement camp. I mean, they had no place to go, and they were put in the camp again without guards. I myself went to the Bürgermeister, to the mayor, and said, look, I'm a German citizen, and I like an apartment from a Nazi. So I got an apartment from a Nazi, and I lived there with 3 girls and one of the brothers, who was later killed in Palestine when the new country came about. And then whoever knocked on my door moved in my house, in my apartment. And one day somebody knocked on my door, and he said, I'm your cousin. I used to be in Russia. I was in Siberia. And his name is Josek Hoffman, Hoffman. Today he lives in Israel, and I talk to him every month. And he moved in. Then another friend of mine, whom I knew from Berlin, he moved in with me, who lives in Berlin, who lives today in Fürth. He has got a factory there. He makes herring and rollmöpse, and his company is called Roma, R-O-M-A, finest product in Germany. He stayed in Germany. He married. He has 1 son, and he remained there. I wish he would have come to America, and he regrets it himself too. He's all alone by himself with his wife and son. He has no friends, and it's tough to be there by yourself. So here we were sitting in Germany, in Fürth, and we were waiting to be able to immigrate to any different countries. You couldn't go to Palestine because the British didn't let you in. And as I mentioned before, and other countries did not take you in. And when I remember today, really is no surprise to me, because the same countries before the war didn't want the Jewish people in there. So why would they let the Jewish people in today now? And so finally, after 3.5 years, I found out that the German Jewish people were able to register to come to America, because the quota for German Jewish people was bigger than any other quotas. So I registered, and I had to go to the port of Hamburg, I believe, and they asked for an interpreter, and 2 days before I was able to go aboard the ship first as an interpreter. Coming on board, a guy from Texas talked to me, and I didn't understand one single word he said to me, even though I knew some English. And the trip took almost 11, 12 days coming to the United States of America. And I remember became there 2 o'clock in the morning, and I visualized the Statue of Liberty there. And speaking of the Statue of Liberty, I got to mention to you in 1939, 930 people wanted to come to the States of America. The ship of fools, They came to Cuba. They had visas to come to Cuba. Cuba let only 3 people in there.
That was St. Louis.
Then at St. Louis, they came to Florida. They saw the city lights. They saw freedom in front of their eyes. Fathers, grandfathers, mothers, children, intelligent people. They called President Roosevelt. He didn't reply. They sent telegrams. Roosevelt sent the Coast Guards in there. Nobody should jump the ships. And they had to be sent back to Germany. The captain of the ship in Germany was horrified, and not many people survived.
That was Hamburg. They went back.
They went back to Germany, to different countries, Belgium, Frankfurt, and France, etc. And I must say, without prejudice, years later, America let in 150,000 Cubans, of which 25,000 Cubans were all murderers. And remember the time when they were sent back they came to America. But 936 Jewish people, the land of freedom, America didn't let those people in. Coming back to Germany, I had to mention that to you, because, you know, I must tell you one thing. Every single person in Europe had a weapon to kill a Jewish person. The weapon was one finger. The finger was there to point, this is a Jewish person. It's a Juif. That's a French Jewish person. To jest Żydek. That's a Polish Jewish person. With that finger, you could kill a Jewish person. Because the Germans, when they marched in, they didn't know who was Jewish or not. So the people who pointed the finger at the Jewish person, they knew when the concentration camp they were killed. And we call that Hitler's willing executioners. They did it joyfully, they did it voluntarily, even though they believed in a religion where Jesus said, you should not kill people, you should put your left cheek when somebody hits you. And many of them called themselves good Christians. They killed a machine gun people, and they went home in Christmas time and celebrated Christmas and kissed their children, which sometimes I wonder, I cannot understand. Coming back again, immigration after the war, the SS and the Nazis were able to go to Switzerland. They went to the Vatican, to Rome. They were able to go to Argentina because the Vatican helped them to escape. They're able to go to Switzerland and got all their gold and all their belongings. Assuming now that somebody did know from the survivors that they had some money in Switzerland, the Swiss banks, they asked for a death certificate in order to get the money back. So the war didn't change after the war. We had no doctors. I never saw a doctor after the war until I went to the United States of America. And anybody who was sick or had any spot on their lungs was unable to come to the United States of America. In order for me to come to the States, I had to have a sponsor. I had to have a profession which I did not have. So I took welding. I took up welding from a Jewish organization in order to have a profession. And I was supposed to go to Detroit to work there. And I didn't like welding, of course. And then I came to the United States of America. I mentioned before 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sponsored by a Jewish organization which was called The Joint, which is Joint. And we were put in a hotel. And after a couple of weeks, I was able to get a job through a friend of mine, and I worked making handbags in New York City. Living in New York, looking at those people when they're sitting in a subway, they were all worn out and drenched out, and I said to myself, surviving a concentration camp, I don't want to live in New York. That's not a place for me. And the first thing I did when I came to New York, since I believe, and Jewish people believe in education is the most important thing in life, and I made it my business for my two sons, which when I got married later on, they went to college and graduated. I went to Textile High School on 18th Street, and I took up English writing and composition, English speaking, and I took up typewriting in order to learn how to spell. And then I lived in New York about until December 1900. And I came to New York in December 17th, 1949, with a army transportation boat which was called General McRae. I was 26 years old at that time. When I was liberated, I was 21 years old. Somebody told me, oh, California, sunshine, palm trees, and beautiful houses with different colors. I said, that's for me. And I went to California.